What we need to do in this movie is export the logo out of Photoshop and bring it into our HTML document. But before we do that, I just want to remove this text that we added towards the end of the last movie to allow us to see the gradient background. After doing that, you can come over to Photoshop, and inside of Photoshop, you'll see this monoplate logo. It's just the text monoplate. And we want to isolate this portion of the layout and export it out as logo.png and save it in our images folder. There's a couple different ways that you can do this. I'm going to show you what I think is probably the most effective way to get the image to be the smallest possible dimensions. So I want you to come over to the Layers panel and expand the header layer group. In there is the logo layer group. Go ahead and expand that. Select the monoplate text layer and select all, Control-A or Command-A on the Macintosh. At that point, you want to copy it to your clipboard, Control-C or Command-C on the Mac. Then come up to the File menu, and under the File menu, you can choose New, which is going to open up the New Document dialog box and automatically capture the appropriate width and the height for the content on that layer, which is just the text monoplate. I'm going to change the resolution to 72 pixels per inch. And you want to make sure that the background contents is set to transparent. Once you have that set up, you can go ahead and click OK. Once you click OK, you can paste the text. Control-V or Command-V on the Mac, you get the text inside the document. Of course, it doesn't have any of the styling that was associated with it in the previous document. So what we can do is come back to monoplate.psd, right-click or control-click on the monoplate layer inside the logo layer group. And what we can do in the contextual menu is copy the layer styles. So you'll notice that command is right here, copy layer style. You can then come over to the new document, right-click or control-click on the active layer, and choose paste layer style. Now monoplate looks exactly as it did inside of monoplate.psd, and in terms of its dimensions, it's as small as it can possibly be. So let's go ahead and save this as logo.png. We can go to the File menu, choose Save for Web. This will open up the Save for Web dialog box. You want to make sure it's set to PNG. Right now, the file size looks pretty good at 1.5K or a little bit over that. We could increase the number of colors. We may want to do that because we have all sorts of gradients happening here. So I'm going to amp it up to 64 colors. And at that point, you can go ahead and click Save. Now remember, you need to save this in the Images directory, which is inside the Includes directory, which is inside the blank directory, which is inside the PSD to HTML folder that you downloaded from our site. And this is important because remember, we have classes already set up that make reference to logo.png. So go ahead and save that. And then you can return back to Dreamweaver. Inside of Dreamweaver, if you want to come over to style.css and review those classes that we're going to be working with, remember, we have logo here and here, which are making reference to images/logo.png. So remember, if we're going to use a heading 3, it's going to establish a line height and a font size. If we're going to use the include class, and we're going to use that in conjunction with an anchor element, you'll notice that we're going to move the text off the screen, and we're going to use this image itself. So remember, those are already set up, which means we can come back to the HTML document. And inside the HTML document, we want to come into the div element that has an ID of logo, and we want to use that h3 class. So go ahead and type in h3, type in class, and we're going to go ahead and type in the include class, which is the incl class. And then we'll go ahead and close that off before we forget. Inside the h3 element, we want to use an anchor element because we want this monoplate logo to be hyperlinked to probably the index page. The actual link itself isn't important, so I'm just going to go ahead and type in a £sign to act as a placeholder temporarily. And then, of course, I can also add a title attribute, and I'll type a £sign in there as well. Then I'll close off the anchor element, and inside the anchor tag, we just want to type monoplate. And again, this is helpful for search engine placement because you actually have text content here. So that was pretty easy. The only other thing that we need to do is we need to create a specific selector for this chain of events that's happening here with the logo ID holding an H3 element, which holds an anchor element. So let's come back to style.css, and we can do this in a couple different places. We can just update this ID selector that already exists, and we can just add width and height values. So I'm going to go ahead and type in a height property of 51 pixels. As you know, that's the size of the image that we created inside of Photoshop. And then we can set its width as well. We're going to set that to 182 pixels. So I think my numbers are right there, but nevertheless, if we go ahead and save style.css and we save index.html, we can take a look at this in our WebKit-based browser. So I'm going to go ahead and use Chrome, and you'll notice that monoplate now appears in the header portion of this web page. Now, I'm not thrilled, honestly, with the appearance of monoplate. We can really see some white pixels here that I would prefer not to have. So let's come back to Photoshop and see if we can fix this. My guess is we probably have to use more colors and maybe a higher bit depth for this PNG. So let's come up to the File menu and choose Save for Web. This time, I'm going to go ahead and switch this to PNG 24. We're not going to choose the number of colors. That obviously isn't an option with PNG 24, but I think this will probably improve the overall look. So I'll go ahead and click Save. I'm going to save it as logo.png. When I save it, I do want to override or replace the original logo.png file. Then we can come back to the browser and refresh it. When we refresh it, you'll notice that the monoplate logo gets cleaned up quite a bit and looks quite a bit nicer. So there you have it. We have the logo in place now. Obviously, the next order of business is to tackle the menu system that's going to appear over here on the right-hand side of the header.